start recording.
Oh, that's probably a good thing.
I kind of need up, but that time slot, like I love the radio, and so not only would you have filled in on my time slot, you would have done your 2 hour time slot before, or was it a 1 hour before?
That's right, 2 hours before. So
And
7 hours altogether.
were you staying from 2 until like 4 or 5 in the morning?
No, rarely. I cheated. I would pre-record most of it at home,
Yeah.
and yeah. So they were okay with that, but yeah, it was different. But it was the prep work during the week that was just like basically every night I'd come home and like don't get me wrong, I love the music, I love doing the show, but it was just like if I didn't put in an hour or two each weeknight when I got home, it made it almost impossible to get everything ready for Friday. So I was just finding that it was just too much. I'd love it to be a full-time job, but it just couldn't be,
With working all week, and I loved it so much, but it is draining, and I eventually burnt out to the point where on my final night, I was like, you know what? I was so run down and whatever, and it was too much. It was
because
too much.
you were doing the whole thing live and then driving home afterwards, right?
That's right. So I would work all week, and then I would drive up to Ottawa on the Friday night, do some prep, do the show, and then drive home. And it was taxing. And I don't know of many people that would do that, to be honest with you.
So what time would you get to bed on Saturday morning? Like we're talking like what, like 9 o'clock?
Yeah, 9 o'clock, depending on how late I stayed. Like sometimes I would stay until, 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and then I would run an hour and a half's worth of music, and so then I would be able to get home at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And of course, there's nowhere to sleep in that studio, so
No.
you can't just like take hour naps.
Not that we haven't tried. I mean, I've slept in that studio before. I've slept on the mixing board. It's face down on the board. Yeah.
So I think I'd finally gotten to the point where, I'd pieced a whole bunch of things together and made a judgment call, and figured that it was probably going to be my last radio broadcast, doing it that way, doing it at that hour, doing, that. And I figured I had done enough for myself. Anyways, I was pretty proud of what I had put together and the fun that was had doing it. So, I made a statement and, went with my heart on it. And, in the end, now I listen back, like I can still listen to all the shows. And I have many of them that I had kept. And I even go back now, and there are little bits and pieces and stuff that really catch me that, there was something that was working right with it. For the variety and the style of show that it was, whether you think that I'm dumb, whether, a listener would think that I'm dumb or would make fun or thought that it was very, ingenious, or, you don't, these people don't know what they're talking about, any number of but that was part of the concept of the show, was to get beyond judgment. There are many people that have opinions, and I get that. And I remember going through a period of my life where if I had an opinion that was different than another person's, I would question. I would continue the conversation a little bit longer by asking questions, because I wanted to learn. And more often than not, it would seem like I was being argumentative. but in the consciousness of our society and of Canadian people, I've really learned that you have to be careful when you ask other people questions. Because when it comes to asking people questions, it means they're going to have to give up an answer, right? And so you can end up in these situations that are, well, almost argumentative or leave a tension. And I eventually got away from that in my early 30s. I really started to realize and learn and see, and really see. And so the show was not about whether or not my opinion or your opinion or John's opinion or Arjun's opinion were correct or completely informed. The show was about um, being comfortable to express what you know in the way that you know it and how you know it in the way that you want to say it. And I think there was a lot of fun, man. I think there was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I
Do
like it.
that.
Yeah.
Sorry, do that at 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, for 5 hours with that group of guys. I think it will be I think it will be a blast.
I like the fact it's very free form. Like you don't feel like you're, oh, I better not say this, or what are they going to think if I say this? So you're good at putting people at comfort, which often gets them to say things that they probably going into the show wouldn't have imagined themselves saying on the air, which I think is great. So who knows what I'm going to say today? I'm usually a pretty reserved guy, but
until
get me through
somebody
my
wisens
Baileys
up.
and yeah.
Until somebody wisens up and realizes that that's what's happening, but and then starts to get fearful of the fact that they might share information that they are going to regret sharing later on. But where I always end up in a point of contention maybe is the fact that I don't do it to pry you for information. And to be honest with you, if you shared something with me that I having that skill to be able to put people at comfort, to get information to begin with, which may say throughout my life for as long as I've done it, I've probably learned the difference between good information and bad information. Maybe I do, but I'm not the type of person, and I don't have the personality for jumping on that, as an opportunity to gain an advantage in a way. If someone shares information with me that's quite valuable and is like, oh, I for one reason or another, I have a safeguard in me, like that just Felicity says, well, don't abuse it. Don't use that, right? And don't use it to gain an advantage. And some people may say, well, you're dumb. Like there's an advantage for you. Life is a competition in many ways. Well, maybe that's true, or maybe it's not.
Did you get some calls like we would, you ever get calls from people saying, "Hey, you're dumb"? We would get some pretty interesting calls on the overnight, but
no one ever called me dumb. No one ever called me stupid. I don't think anyone ever even gave negative feedback about the show. Now, I understand that if you don't have something nice to say, then maybe more often than not, you shouldn't say shit at all, stuff at all. But no one, and people were comfortable coming on, and people were comfortable doing interviews, and the people I'd interviewed, I would always send them copies of the interviews, and some of these people are highly regarded in their fields. And I never had anyone come back and say, no, Greg, don't air that. No, Greg, don't play that. No, Greg, I'm not happy with that. And
yeah, it's changing subject a little bit. I wanted to ask you, like, the fact that you're like, as much as it's crazy doing a show at those hours and like the lack of sleep and, working a long week and going to bed at 9 o'clock in the morning, there's something about late night radio, like that's always been my thing. All of my memories of radio, for the most part, the best memories are from listening to something way past my bedtime as a kid, tuning into whether it was Larry King or, it was a music show in the early 90s. It was always at like some insane hour Like, well, when you're 14 years old, I guess anything after 10 p.m. is an insane hour. But as I got older, I'd be up at 2 or 3 in the morning listening to late night radio. So there's something about your show that just fits that time of day or night, actually, that I think works. I think that's when for me, that's when I'm most creative. That's when I'm most open-minded. The mundaneness of 9 to 5 life is the farthest thing from your mind. So do you find that are you a night owl, and do you find that that's the most natural time to be doing these kind of shows? Maybe I should be calling you back at 3 o'clock in the morning.
You make a good point. I loved the time slot. Okay, maybe if I didn't work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 on top of it, and maybe if that was, my regular gig, and if that was all I was doing, or maybe just a little bit of what I was doing, with a day or two before off and maybe the day or two after. It was perfect. It was
Give
fucking
yourself
perfect.
3 or 4 days off before and after, I say.
Well, and someone once said to me, I was once in a band. I was in a band for 10 years, right, with great guys that knew a lot more than me about how musical instruments work and how bands are. They had all done it before. And to be honest with you, I hadn't even really learned how to play a guitar. And it just so happened that an opportunity came up for a battle of the bands, and I was living with these guys, and I said, well, you need a Carleton student. I'm a Carleton student. Why don't I learn how to play a couple songs, and we'll go in and we'll play the battle of the bands? What was it in residence there? It wasn't the Oasis. There was
Breeze In.
The Breeze In, man. The Breeze. That's right. The fucking Breeze In. They had the Battle of the Bands in there, and then they moved it to Oliver's, right? And they had the full-on
There
stage
was the
and shit.
Oasis too downstairs. The Oasis.
That's right. And so these guys, and then it just so happened that I must have really wanted to learn how to play the guitar. I must have thought it was very cool, so I picked it up and I played it, and then was in a band for 10 years, and we did a lot of different things, and I learned a lot, from back end to front end to practice to equipment to a lot. But we recorded one album, we did one CD, and I remember after we recorded the CD and it was all done, and I think we got the initial engineer's cut a couple days afterwards without the full mix down.
Mm-hmm.
And we all went to one of our guys' places, and the 5 of us sat and listened to the CD. And of course, I think we played cards and had beers, and we got to hear ourselves professionally recorded. And there were a couple moments during the recording that completely surprised us when we heard them, right? And even though we had played the music and we had been there and we all sat in the studio while each of us was recording each other, all of our parts, we witnessed and watched it and we played. But when you listened to the CD, there were a couple moments that we were completely surprised with what we heard, unexpected, even though we had just gone through the whole process. And I remember the lead guitar player saying to me, he looked at me and he said, he said that sometimes that just happens. It's interesting how sounds just happen. And, the show was kind of like that. At that hour, I loved it. I had a feel for it. And when I listen back on things, of course you can be critical, right? Oh, maybe here, there type of thing. But there were things that happened that I enjoy and that are unique and have a little bit more meaning to them than Then maybe everyday 9 to 5 radio. It has something to it, and I'm glad that it was my show, and I'm glad that it's still my show. Like I can still hold on to Tones, Riffs, and Notes. Even Tones, Riffs, and Notes says something to me. I like the title. I like the title.